everybody. It's Carina from Breakthrough Find Freedom. And today's guest is a very, today's story is a very poignant one. And it has a lot of influence and it has a lot of impact on what's happening in the world right now regarding mental health and a whole lot of other issues and the love of a mother, which is even more important than anything else in this world, right? Because it has such an influence on our world and the way we grow up and the way we see things. So with that thought, I'd like to introduce my beautiful guest, Barbara Gates, and let her tell us the story and tell us where she's at this moment. So, Barbara, hello. So, thank you. I'm so excited to have you here on our show today.
Thank you, Carina. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about something that's very important to me. About the change that needs to happen, hopefully sooner than later, for those who are struggling with mental illness and their families. So,
yes.
Did you want me to just launch into my story, or you said,
yes.
How am I in this moment? Well, I got my makeup on and I'm here. We did it. Isn't there a saying that like 90% of success is showing up? So
yes,
we are here together, and I'm sure we'll create some synergy. And I carry with me a deep sadness. So I'm generally a very happy person, a very optimistic person, an activist. But I've been through tragedy and trauma in my life, but nothing like what I went through, what our family, myself, my husband, and my son's sister went through the last 6.5 years until my son died January 18th of this year of 2023 from an overdose, fentanyl and meth. We just got the toxicology report just a couple weeks ago. So, and I learned a lot in 6 years that I didn't know I needed to know. When we first moved to Oceanside, this was about 16 years ago. And I remember we live not far from a busy intersection. So every day we go through this busy intersection if we leave the house. I remember there was this disheveled, dirty young man on the corner, panhandling at the main intersection near my house. And I said to my husband, I'm very empathetic, and my heart just broke for this young man. And I remember looking at my husband. My kids were in middle school. So Jack was 13 and Lucy was 11. We just moved here when they were in middle school. And I said, how can that happen? Where's his family?
Yes.
And I just assumed that there were, that family could help, that the system could help. And that was like what do they call it? Like an omen, because it seems like since then, in the last 10 years, maybe a little bit, maybe 5, there's just been this explosion of homelessness. And I have a theory. I have a very strong theory, but I do know that it has a lot to do with mental illness and drug addiction. And these individuals who came from nice families, loving families, were struck with a brain, physiological brain disease, and they cannot get the help that they need. My son tried 16 times or more, but I have documented 16 times that he voluntarily tried to get help and couldn't get the help. And so they self-medicate. My son had a public defender who said they all use meth. It works great on their symptoms. It makes them feel great. I remember I looked up, what does meth do for you? And I was telling my mom about it. I said, well, it makes you feel like intense pleasure, a ton of energy. I can't remember what the other thing was, but energy, and confidence and strength. And my mom, who's 93, this Friday said, well, that sounds wonderful.
Yes, yes.
So it's not a mystery, I don't think. I think it's really obvious what's happening. And my son tried 16 times to get help, and I can get into some of those details, but I miss him. I miss the healthy, happy, hardworking person that he was. But I'm have some comfort in knowing that he's not suffering anymore.
Barbara, thank you for that. That was hard. I just want to go back to maybe the beginning so we can give a bit of context to our viewers and our listeners. How did this all start? What happened?
Yeah, summer of 2016, Jack had come home for summer break from Humboldt State University, where he was an honor student. He had 2 more semesters and he was going to graduate with honors. He started out as an engineering major. Humboldt had a special environmental engineering. I'm so sorry. I'll put that on silent. Humboldt State University had a very specialized environmental engineering program that emphasized sustainability. And my son was an environmentalist. He's the reason we got solar on the house. He wouldn't let up. I mean, we considered ourselves environmentalists, but Jack didn't let us off the hook. And so we have solar. We're the first ones in our neighborhood to have solar. And Jack's the reason for that. He wouldn't let up until I traded in our car for a hybrid back in 2013. 2013, he was 1 year out of high school, graduated the scholar athlete, was voted most likely to succeed. He was the most exceptional. He was kind. He was a little bit shy and awkward like his dad, but so kind. And he would overcome that shyness. He to be the president of the environmental club. He would do, before we had curbside recycling, he was doing the recycling for the entire Oceanside High School. He'd fill his car with dirty cans and bags and do it himself. I couldn't have been more proud of him. Summer of 2016. So he was an environmental resource engineering major. So it had a sustainability element, and that's what. And he was incredible at math. So everyone steered him towards engineering. And then when he got to Humboldt, and he went to community college here in Oceanside at Miracosta. He said to me, Mom, even if money were no object, I would not spend $50,000 to go to college when I didn't have to. So he was practical, pragmatic. He was smart. He was kind to his parents for not making us, for saving us the money for college. And then he transferred. And while he was there, he took some classes in critical race, gender, and sexuality. And boy, the social justice element of that really caught fire for him. So he changed his major to critical race, gender, and sexuality. And he said that he wanted to use what he learned about the oppression and solutions to oppression to help liberate animals. Because he started the vegan club. At Humboldt State University, the very first animal rights club there. And he worked with PETA to do a bunch of wonderful events. He worked with the Women's Studies department to do intersectionality forums. It was incredible. He came home summer of 2016 for summer break, and we had a great summer. We went camping at the Kern River like we do. But there were a few warning signs. One was that he was smoking marijuana every day at night. And I would get up to let the dog in, and I would find him outside getting high, and that wasn't like him. I know that getting stoned is not uncommon for college kids. I had friends who did it. I tried it. It wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
It's, and it's becoming legal now, or it is, it's become legal for recreation use. So I was worried because it was daily use, but he was doing so well in school, and we had such a nice summer between summer of 26. But we went to an event. We went to the Animal Rights Conference in Los Angeles together, and we were sharing a hotel room. And he said to me one night at the end of a great day, we were sitting opposite on the two beds in the hotel room, and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. I'm experiencing really, really intense anxiety."
Mm-hmm.
I remember learning as a mom that I'm supposed to help my kids roll with the punches. Life's hard. And I remember gosh, if I could go back in time. But I said, "Honey, of course you're stressed. You're 23, you're about to graduate. You got to go out and make a life in the world. We all feel anxious." I said, and I pointed to the conference. I said, when we go to these social events at the conference, everybody makes a beeline for the bar. Everybody feels anxiety, social anxiety, and they go for a cocktail. And I just thought he was just so, smart and just had so much going for him that he would pull through that. But I wish I knew then what I know now. And I don't know that I could have gotten him to stay home and take a gap year, but I wish I would have gotten him I wish I would have tried. He went back to school, and by the time he came home at Christmas break, he was in a full-blown mental breakdown, and he was using illicit drugs, ecstasy, mushrooms, and he was a different person. And for a long time, I've heard that ecstasy, I've read, that it's the highest of highs, but you pay a really big price because it drops you and it gives you the lowest of lows. So for a long time, myself and my husband, we thought, well, this dark side that we're seeing must be the downside of the ecstasy. And he went back to college after Christmas break. People said, "You're going to let him go back to school?" Because he was really in bad shape, and his thoughts they were jumbled. And we had no idea it could be psychosis or bipolar. He went back to school. He said he was going to turn everything around. He had basically flunked out of his last semester. He went from a happy, hardworking honor student to in one semester, a dark, drug-addicted dropout. And he was going to go back and redeem himself. And within a couple weeks of going back for the spring semester, we got a call from the jail in Humboldt, and he'd been arrested for on campus for taking LSD. He was having a bad LSD trip. And he came home. He got suspended for a year. And that's another story. I don't know if we'll have time, but the arrest was brutal. It was brutal. And I think that it traumatized his brain so much so that it may have catalyzed a worse condition. So he came home, and it was just we still didn't know that he had mental illness. We still attributed it all to drugs. And it may, to this day, all the experts we've talked to, all the workshops we've gone to, no one can tell us if the drugs triggered his mental illness or if he was self-medicating because the mental illness was beginning to afflict his brain. And either scenario is plausible, and I don't know. So that's how it all started. And he came home, and he started taking college classes. He went through several jobs, but at that point, he was getting stoned 24/7. And I kicked him out of the house eventually. It took a year, but I kicked him out of the house. I still didn't know. And he called up and said, I'm cold and I'm hungry. And I said, if you want a roof over your head, you need to go to rehab. And he said, okay, I will. And we took him to a rehab that was recommended. By now I was going to Al-Anon. I wasn't at NAMI yet. The people had suggested that I get in touch with the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. It took me over a year, close to 2 years, to finally go to NAMI, for it to finally break through that my son had mental illness, because he didn't really show it. He would just be rude and dark. He wasn't delusional at that point. I remember the first time he shared his first delusion. He'd been living at home for a year before he shared a delusion. And that's kind of the cornerstone symptom of schizophrenia and bipolar is either, jumbled thoughts and lack of executive functioning, but delusions, false beliefs. That's unshakable. And then also like visual or audio hallucinations. So he didn't show any of that. He was just dark and rude, and he was getting good grades at the community college still, but he was going through jobs. And one day I asked him to get up and get out, maybe go for a jog. And he blew marijuana in my face in his bedroom, and I lost it. And I said, out. And he had a van. He had a van type car. And I just thought, he needs to know that this isn't acceptable. So we took him to this. So he agreed to go to rehab. I had heard about this place in Del Mar that our insurance took. That's a whole other story. And we went right down there. He was willing to go. And they told us that he had drug-induced psychosis, which was a foreign term to me, and that he needed stabilization. This was a new vocabulary for me. And that night, or within a day or two, we got him to a psychiatric ward for stabilization. And all the while I'm thinking, okay, he'll get stabilized and then he'll start the rehab and we'll get back on track here, because he's such a great person. And once we got him into the psychiatric hospital, I had a trip planned with my daughter for a family reunion on the East Coast. So I thought, okay, he's safe. My husband was away at work in Washington, and I went to the East Coast, and I got a call that he left the facility screaming profanities. His girlfriend picked him up, and he did get a diagnosis of bipolar at that point, and that changed everything. The next year was spent trying to find help for him, but it wasn't there. It didn't exist. So I know that's a really long answer to your question. It's a really, really big issue.
There's so many, it's such a complex story. I send you my heartfelt, my heart is just so sore for you. How are you feeling about all this? Because, and you don't have to answer these questions if you don't want to.
I'm an open book,
I mean, knowing that, and they might trigger you as well, okay? Knowing that what you didn't know. So do you feel like, if I hadn't thrown him out, and no, we can't change anything. How do you think things would have been any different, really, if you hadn't put him out, told him to leave? Do you think things would have really been any different? Maybe that was a trigger to actually see that there was a problem.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. When I go to Al-Anon meetings, which is a very, very good support system, I highly recommend it. You don't have to talk. You can just listen. But one of the principles at Al-Anon is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can and the wisdom to know the difference. And I knew that I couldn't change Jack. I'd actually gone to a lecture by a former addict who was now running a sober living home. And she said something so profound. She said to this parent group, this parent Al-Anon group, and that's my group was for parents of addicts. She said, if you could love it out of us, we would all be cured. And she did share that parents, family can be triggers even. So you learn in Al-Anon that it really is up to them. Now, that being said, when you add serious mental illness with psychotic features, you know, the odds of getting better are very, very low. So do I wish I was seeing a therapist at the time, and the word, she taught me a new word. It was untenable. She said, your situation sounds untenable. I had to kind of go look that up. It was not, it kind of reminds me, you know, in the airplane, they say, put the face mask on you. You have to save yourself first. When you throw if you try to save a drowning person, they'll pull you down under with them. And that's what was happening. You know, we're older. That's pretty obvious. I have high cholesterol. My husband has high blood pressure. Stress is when I went to my first NAMI family to family meeting again, which I highly recommend. It's not a fun class, but it helped me understand my son. It helped me cope. It helped me be more compassionate with my son. But I remember the first night we went there and we filled out these big, you know, the big sheets of paper that they put on an easel, and we write down our feelings, and it's all feelings of trauma. I feel traumatized. I feel like the last 6 years I survived some constant trauma, and desperately trying to help him. And don't know if it's really super crystal clear, but I'm a pretty strong woman. I'm a fighter, and I went to bat for Jack, and I have the support system to do that. And I just think there's so many that don't have that advantage, you know, of someone willing to speak up and yell sometimes, you know, and make a fight, put up a fight. You know, there was no way that he could stay here and things remain the same. And there was a point over the 6 years, he went to jail several times for things like vandalism, felony vandalism. The first time he broke a glass window or a glass door because he was trying to get to the water. He was on really bad drugs. And he was paranoid that everybody was trying to kill him. And he thought he had called, and he said, I have to get to water. I'm dying of thirst. And he said, but if there's anything suspicious on our street, I'm not coming over. He never showed up. And that night he parked his car down a dirt road, and he found this business where he could see a water dispenser, and he broke the door to get to the water. And when the alarm went off, he waited for the police to come because he wanted help. Yes. And he spent time in jail for that, because if you vandalize something that's over $400, it's considered a felony. So I had met people at NAMI, facilitators who've been through, who are peer support people who have been through addiction, who have been through mental health challenges, very, very serious psychosis, who said jail saved their life. Yes. And you know what? Our jails are our current mental institutions. It's horrible. It's wrong. My son was incarcerated and punished for having mental illness. And I can only hope and pray that maybe in my lifetime we might have a compassionate alternative.
Okay, yes, but before we talk about that, because that's very important, I just want to, because I know there's a lot of people out there who possibly been in the same situation as you. How did you cope with that helplessness and that hopelessness, watching your son deteriorate and knowing there was nothing you could do about it? How did you cope with it? Besides going to counseling, of course, that was great, but how did you cope with that?
Well, I didn't feel like there was nothing I could do. I did everything I could do. So there was always something to do. There was a letter to send to the therapist. There was a letter to send to the public defender. When he was with, the in-home outreach team, there were letters. I have a Jack file that's, a foot thick with, showing up for his court dates so that he would feel supported, visiting him in jail every week, visiting his homeless encampment. And he was always welcome to come to our home on Sunday. I said, Jack, come for Sunday dinners and come on Wednesdays. You can come and do your laundry. My son was an unusual case, I think, because he was such an environmentalist that he didn't think there was anything wrong. In fact, he prided himself in living outdoors. That was sort of like his return to a more primitive, natural lifestyle. So he kind of felt proud of that. So that, in fact, when he was given housing, when he was in a treatment program, and he told the counselor that he didn't want housing, that he probably wouldn't stay there. And the counselor told me Jack was the first person that he met that didn't want housing. And I'm sure there's others like him. I had a girlfriend I have a girlfriend who's real sweet. And she said, I get it. If I felt safe, I'd love to sleep out under the stars. And since Jack's passed away, I go out and I look up at the night sky. I hope and pray that maybe I'll see him again someday. I'm not a super spiritual or religious person, but there's a part of me. But I go out there and I look up at the stars and I think, yeah, I get it. It's really beautiful out here. And he had a camp that raccoons would come visit, and he loved the animals. So it was hard to convince him otherwise. Yeah, I even have pictures of him. And I guess my point with this, or what I feel coming to the surface with this is, it's easy to judge. I have a neighbor who judges us and judges Jack, and is very harsh and cruel. And it's very easy when you're not going through it to think that it's all that person's fault, or that somehow they're bad, somehow they're beyond help, but in Jack's little camp, I have a picture of it. He put in a little garden. He couldn't maintain it. He didn't have the executive functioning to maintain it, but his intentions were beautiful, to go back to nature, to not hurt the planet with development and things like that. So not sure if I answered your question, but
I think you did. But I'd like to, that's another thing. It's a big thing of the judgment. It's so easy to judge people and to look. I mean, I work with the homeless community, and
thank you. Bless you.
And
you're an earth angel. I appreciate the work you do so much.
Thank you, Barbara. But what I was saying is that it's so easy to judge people, like, that person there, that crazy person, crazy. I'm going to put crazy in inverted commas, sure. screaming at the traffic light, or that other person sleeping on the floor. They're just lazy. They don't want to do anything. Right. And it's very easy to judge people and to just throw people away like that. But we need to realize that unless we know the story, everyone's got a story, and we don't know. we can't judge people on, we haven't walked in their shoes. We don't know the story. So it's very easy to do that. Whereas it's more difficult to actually sit down and say, what is your story? How can I help you? Even if it's just listening to you.
Yeah.
And I think we as people, we need to appreciate and accept people on a person, a human being level, and be kind instead of judging. And also goes down to, we judge ourselves so harshly, so that's also, so much easier to point fingers at other people. So I'm sure that also changed your attitude towards the homeless population, towards the homeless. I'm labeling now, but towards people that are living on the streets. I'm sure that changed your whole attitude about that as well, and gave you more acceptance. Or
yeah. Oh, well, and like I said, I have to grab a Kleenex. I'm gonna go. I'm a crier, and I'm okay with that. So if it makes people uncomfortable,
well,
I can't help it. And my son he inherited that gene. We both tear up. Goodness gracious, I tear up at sentimental commercials. It's just so. Your question was about. You might need to remind me what your question was, but it was about how people judge.
Yes, and how your attitude or your perception changed from that person in the street to the person you saw those 15 years when you first moved into Oceanside, to now experiencing your son in the same situation.
Well, I'm very empathetic, so I never, I lost my sister to alcoholism. She was the brightest star in the world. She received her master's with special distinction. I was so jealous of her. She just was so wonderful. My best friend, I lost her to pancreatic cancer, but she was a severe alcoholic, which is a risk factor for pancreatic cancer. I've seen a lot of loss in my life. I have so much compassion for addicts. I think that it runs in my family. I had a drinking problem in college that I think could have gone either way. I think I just recently read somewhere, like the statistic for alcoholics or addicts is, maybe 1 in 10 people. It strikes the very best of us. It afflicts the very best, and it's no one's fault. How come I could party all through college, all through my 20s, and I didn't get addicted, and my sister did? And Jack's sister is doing, my son's sister, she's doing great. She partied. Why do some people fall victim to addiction? It's not their fault. It's something physiological. So my attitudes didn't change about addicts or people living on the street. I always had empathy. I think that, and my theory behind this homeless explosion actually has to do, I might say something controversial, but that's okay. That makes it more fun. Is I do believe that the strains of marijuana, that the marijuana industry has they don't care about wellness. That's how they market their product. They care about getting people hooked on their product so they can make profits, just like at the alcohol industry, just like any industry that is for profit. And these particular industries have a stake in getting people addicted. They'll sell more. I read somewhere that the alcohol and marijuana industries don't make money off recreational, casual, social drinkers. They make their money from addicts who drink heavily daily. And the strains of marijuana now are so potent. when I was in the 80s and I was smoking weed a little bit, I never really liked it very much, but man, a lot of people do. I don't get it, but it was 5 to 10% THC, and THC is a hallucinogenic. It's a hallucinogenic like LSD and meth are a hallucinogenic. And the higher the THC, the more of a hallucinogenic. You can, our young people whose brains are not fully developed until 25, 27 years old can walk into a dispensary and buy oil for their vapes, and vapes have like taken off like wildfire. They can buy a concentration of THC up to 90%, which is about 1,000 times more potent than the marijuana of the 80s and the 70s, than I would venture to say natural, organic marijuana. And it's not only getting people addicted, but it's triggering psychosis. And that could very well have been what happened to my son. So my philosophy about the homeless explosion is that the marijuana strains are so strong, and it just got legalized. The timing, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing this explosion, and the strains are so strong. And then people can have a mental break, lose everything like my son did, lose jobs, lose his academic career, have it be thrown out by the family, lose everything. Now they're on the streets. They don't have any money. Now they're going to start doing meth. They're going to start. And what my son started doing was stealing so he could trade for meth, because it's everywhere. You walk out your front door and there's meth on every street corner. And I think that that's fueling this homeless epidemic. And I do think, and I never would have said this, I'm pretty liberal. I never would have said that marijuana was so bad, but this industry has gotten so greedy and corrupt that I do believe that's what's happening. And I have total compassion. So my attitude towards the people hasn't changed. My attitude towards these industries has changed, and my attitude towards policy. I didn't know that the policies prevent my son from getting help, prevent me from helping my son get help. And
yes, that's the next question, because for me, what I've seen as well is that there's a lack of, for the want of a better word, is the lack of the mental health. There's not enough mental health help for these people, right? And that's also why they're in that situation. And also, there's a lack of meaning and purpose. Life has become so like shallow in a way, right? Where people are losing meaning, purpose. There's no sense of belonging anywhere. So just I'm also going off on a tangent right now. So what I'm saying to you is, tell us a bit about what happened that your son, because you were saying that he tried 16 times to get help. And I'm going to take it back again just for 1 second and say that I've seen it, how people come to me and say, you know what, all I want to do is get rehab. All I want to do is get out of this. I'm going to die if I don't get off the streets. And there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to take these. There's nowhere because there's no beds. There's no help for these people. So tell us a bit about, and this it is a bit controversial, but that's okay. Tell us a bit about your experience with 16 times where Jack asked for help and he didn't get any help.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize what I've learned is that early intervention is so important. And for every one of these failures, that I don't see it as my son's failure, I see every one of them was a setup for failure for him. We're losing time. So if we can't get to them, it struck Jack when he was 24. He died when he was 29. He just turned 29. If we could have helped him when he was 23, 24, 25. And, I don't think we have time for me to go into all of it, but, there was the time in 2021, a lot of times when I say that he did voluntary help, it was that he got in trouble for setting his camp on fire. Arson. Now he's nailed this nature boy who loves the raccoons, who would never, ever hurt a fly. He's vegan. He's an environmentalist. He loved his camp. But in a psychotic, drug-induced stupor, he took his lighter and put it on the edge of a palm tree frond that was dry, and his whole camp went up. Actually, he didn't get caught that time. He did not get caught. He went back and set up camp in the same spot. It had burned out a lot of the garbage. It actually looked a whole lot better. It was in a swamp, so the fire went out and everything was okay. It could have been very, 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 very bad. But he got lucky. He cleaned it. It was a clean camp. He went back and then he set some, according to my version of the story, what his public defender, what he told me was he had a campfire going at that point. So weeks later, after the actual foliage, he had a campfire going, and apparently he had a couple campfires. It could have been something that he saw as ritualistic. His delusions were very much religious and spiritual based. You know, he could have been in some kind of mystical psychic state, but he got arrested for arson.
Oh, okay.
And like I said, and that's a strike. That can be like 10 to 20 years in jail. Now, once again, the system tried to help him, and they did reduce his sentence. I got involved, letters to the public defenders, letters to anybody who would hear me. And I would say he had raccoons. He would never do this on purpose. So he got his sentence reduced, and then they recognized that he was mentally ill, and they gave him the option of treatment. It was always for substance use disorder. There is no treatment for psychiatric unless they volunteer. And that's where the problem is. That's the crux of the problem, is that people who are mentally ill and addicted don't necessarily believe that they need help. But more importantly, more urgently, is that they're not in a state of mind. If you're average, and I don't mean to diminish, but if a person like my sister, who has everything going for her, can't get sober, and now we're asking somebody who's psychotic to stick it out in a rehab program voluntarily, then we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And I just saw something on the news, and I think it's important that there was just something on the news about a mom who's suing the federal government because her daughter's killer had been dismissed from the military with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and he was able to buy a gun.
Wow.
Because the federal government, this is happening right now. And it was on the news last night, but we need to do something for these people because it's the right thing and the compassionate thing to do. And we can't expect that if your average person has a hard time staying in a rehabilitation program and treatment program, how can we expect that from someone who's psychotic? They not only are a danger to themselves, but they are a danger. And my son was angry at people he had felt wronged him. I was worried that he was going to do something violent and horrible, because when he was on meth, remember, meth makes you feel energized. And for Jack, that was explosive. It makes you feel powerful and confident. For Jack, that was arrogant and aggressive. And it's everywhere. We have to do something for public safety. But we're asking the impossible if we think that they are going to volunteer. And so Jack, when he did leave jail and he was in a program, he finally volunteered for psychiatric help. He'd been sober long enough in jail, and the program was okay. Well, it was 2 meetings a week for 2 hours. But he said, Mom, I'm going to do that assertive community treatment that you talked about. And I had called his counselors and said, please, 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 please convince him to get into assertive community treatment, also called ACT. When I talked to his lawyer didn't even know it was called assertive. His lawyer knew it as ACT, They don't, even the lawyers, public defenders don't even know what the acronym stands for. Jack signed up for it. This was at the end of 2021. Things were going pretty okay. He was coming to the house every Saturday. We had special days together. He was put on a waiting list. This goes back to what you're saying. The help isn't there. He was put on a waiting list behind 35 people.
Cool.
And within a couple weeks, he received a check from our government for pandemic unemployment back pay. He had worked something out with a friend of a former cellmate. He filled out the paperwork, and somehow my son qualified, and $15,000 was direct deposited into my son's account. It was like the perfect storm. It was like and so he couldn't get the help. He was on a waiting list. He won the lottery and he left treatment. And that was the end of 2021. And we watched him spiral through 2022, got arrested again, got voluntary treatment again, walked away again. And that was this last January. He walked away from a treatment program, which I said to the lawyer, I said to everybody, this is a setup for failure again. You're asking the impossible of this young man who has serious psychiatric issues. And he did. He walked out within a week. We were able to have, my dad turned 90. As a family, we got to be together. It wasn't easy, but his probation officer gave him special permission, and we drove up to Northern California. We got 4 days with Jack, but it wasn't easy. He was still very addicted. We came home, the caseworkers picked him up, these earth angels like you. There's so many people trying to help, and I feel like their hands are tied. They want to help, and their services are good, but they can't because we're relying on the sick person to stay, to have these superpowers of sanity that would help them stay with a program. So we had this wonderful weekend with the family, not easy, but beautiful pictures, beautiful moments, tough moments. And then they picked him up and they took him to treatment on a Monday. And on Friday the 13th, he left. And they found we got a call from the medical examiner the following Friday. And he had overdosed. And I am grateful that he's not suffering anymore. But if I had a magic wand, I wouldn't want him to be gone. I would want him to have a shot at wellness. And that means involuntary, long-term care. Not institutions, but a compassionate campus where patients and clients can step down to different levels. It's a fantasy right now. That's a fantasy, but it's what a lot of activists are calling for, a continuum of care, housing that heals, hashtag housing that heals. And I am encouraged. There's a Senator Susan Eggman of Stockton has a bill, SB 43, and it is making its way through committees. It just passed through the Judiciary Committee. I believe it passed through the Health Committee. So it'll be voted on, which will expand the definition of grave disability. I couldn't prove that my son needed help because he could eat out of garbage cans and sleep in a cardboard box. I said to an authority at a NAMI workshop, National Alliance for Mental, at a workshop, they had somebody explain to us how you get conservatorship. That was the final frontier. I was trying to get Jack conserved. I had an 8-page document. I was working with a consultant to try to get him conserved that would compel me to have to get help. And I said to the gentleman giving the workshop, so if my son can eat out of a garbage can and crawl into a cardboard box, he does not meet criteria for grave disability. And he said, you are correct. And every parent, it was a room full of parents with kids who had psychosis. And we all just gasped that could be true. So this new bill is trying to expand the definition of grave disability to include so many like Jack who need to be compelled into help. I don't know if it would have made a difference for my Jack. I don't know if a year, there's a lot of success stories. There's so many inspirational stories where people have been able to lead productive, happy lives. But at least he would have had a shot. It might not have worked. He never had a shot. So,
sure. Okay. Sorry. So what I'm going to ask you now is, what do you propose? So you mentioned a bit about what you think would work. What are your ideas? What would have made, what would you, if you had a magic wand, what kind of outcome would you have liked? That's not the right question, sorry. What would you like to have seen happen? Okay, so what I'm saying is, your Jack didn't make it, and my heart is so sore for that. But what do you propose? What do you want out of this for the future? So that Jack's death wasn't for nothing, and Jack's life, his beautiful life, wasn't for nothing.
If I could change one thing, and thank you for that. Thank you for your sympathy. I appreciate it. And I appreciate, by the way, when people ask me about my son, it's not people who are grieving need to know, need people not to act like they're supposed to get better fast. If I could change one thing, it would be that, well, and it's, okay, let me finish my sentence. So many thoughts. It would be, we would raise the age of family members being able to get help. Once your child turns 18, and they are children at 18, but once they're 18, you have no rights to know about what's going on with their physical and mental health at 18. So there was, and if we have them on our insurance till they're 26, we have our kids on our insurance, we know the brain isn't fully developed until they're 26 or 27. I think for psychotic disorders, especially if there's any criminality, that parents should have authority to institutionalize. But we don't even have the institutions. So there's so many things that need to be fixed. But it would give family members the ability to, when your parents have dementia, family members can intervene and get the help that they need and protect this vulnerable population. Now, I don't like comparing dementia to mental illness. Mental illness is very difficult. These people it's not a happy disease. It doesn't make them crazy happy. It makes them crazy dark. It's such a cruel disease. It drives people away. It drives people away. And that's the most tragic thing about it. If someone has an illness of the heart or cancer, or people and the medical community envelop them with love and care. But this disease that affects your brain, and I heard a doctor say, if something's wrong with your brain, you're not you. Whether it's a brain injury or psychosis. And so family members need to be able to help these people whose wires are tangled. We need to be able to do that. And the other thing about that, so there's the fact that they're on our insurance till they're 26, the fact that their brains aren't developed. But we know that early intervention is key. And that's another reason to raise, for these disorders, to raise that age for family intervention to like 27. that might have made, that would have given Jack that shot, a shot at, you know, I'm just, he was a water polo player. You miss 100% of the shots you never take. He never got a shot. But
okay.
Other than that, building. Man, I wish I'd win the lottery. I actually have started playing the lottery because I have this dream. If I win that lottery, I am building this institution, this campus, and it'll have a campground for people who don't want to live indoors. Where is it written that we have to live indoors? My son said that would feel like a prison to him. Where is it written? We need to have campsites that are, that's another thing I'd love to have campsites with sanitation and services, because we've got them anyways. Anybody who doesn't see campgrounds on our streets must be living under a rock. We have the campsites. Yeah. Why don't we create something? And I know they're doing that. They're starting to do that, but there's no privacy at these campsites, and a lot of people don't want to go to shelters. There's no privacy. There's no
yes. I mean, then the shelters is a whole different podcast on its own, because it's, people that say it's dangerous. Anyway, let's not even go down that road. And Carina, it's very archaic as well. It's time to change it and realize that people need community. So you were talking about institutions
and I'm excited, yes, because you and Josh I can't wait to go to your event, and it's a healing event, and I'm going, and I can't wait. It looks wonderful, and I can't wait to see Josh again. You South Africans are a powerful force here, and I'm glad you're here. But your event is in nature, and there are healing powers there, and so putting people up in motels is good. It's better. But if they want to be in nature, let's give them campsites as a bridge. Anyway.
Yes. And also, the hotels are great, but what happens when the hotel, the voucher's finished, then you're back to the same. Yes, it's a very contentious issue. And thank you. Yes, I'm so glad you're going to come to the event. It's going to be beautiful. Mental health and spirituality, I think that's what we need. People need purpose and meaning in their lives. Wow, Barbara, I could speak to you, and maybe we'll have a follow-up, because it's such an important issue to share, and to allow other people to speak up and to realize that.
I'm listening.
And to allow other people to realize that it's okay to speak up. It's okay to share your story, so that it's only by sharing your story do we know what's happening and we can find a solution. And the only way we're going to find a solution, or to really not find a solution, actually do something about it, is to work together and to build each other up. So thank you so much, Barbara, for being here. It was an honor and a pleasure. And just before you go, I know that we have to just give a shout out to your business, because I know that you've got a nonprofit.
Oh, that's very kind of you. You know what I'm doing? I'm looking for a picture of Jack. I just wanted to hold it up and make him a person, make him real.
Yes.
Wait, there it is. There's my.
We can't see it. So what we'll do is we'll add it to that's a beautiful picture.
There's my baby, my angel now.
Beautiful picture. Yes. Many blessings to him, and many blessings to you, Barbara, for getting through this, and for realizing that. I hope that we can do something to make Jack's life, like I said before, worth it, and his death worth it.
We met because I am seeking a group to give talks about this to, because I was blindsided. Never learned it in any of my parenting classes. Never, you know, I shared how long it took for me to accept that he had mental illness. No, I used to watch Oprah when the kids were growing up. There was never an Oprah show on this subject. No parenting book, no PTA. This blindsided me, and I wish I had known what to look for. So I am passionate about working eventually someday. This has nothing to do with my nonprofit, but working with a group to try and help parents know what to look for and know maybe how to navigate the system and maybe advocate together for change. And there's a lot of good people working towards change. So thank you for having me, and I'm glad we met.
Thank you, Barbara. It was an honor and a pleasure to have you too. And we will have details if anybody's interested in being part of this group because I think, again, mental health is something that people fear. It's Break Fear, Find Freedom, right? People fear it so much, and that's why a lot of people turn away, because it's scary for them. So let's take away the stigma of mental health, and let's speak about it and share the story so that everyone can learn and not be blindsided. So we can save more people. Thank you. Thank you, Jack's mom. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much for this time. And thank you, everyone else, for listening to the story. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.